Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Manga Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. The GPS chimed softly, interrupting the hum of the car engine as Eric turned onto the quiet, upscale street. A faint drizzle misted the windshield, blurring the rows of neatly trimmed hedges and the glowing windows of stately homes. The address Rachel had keyed into the system, supposedly for her girls' night, was etched in bold on the navigation screen. But this wasn't the quaint bistro she mentioned. It was a luxury apartment complex, sleek and modern, with a glowing glass facade that loomed over the neighborhood like a quiet predator. Eric parked 2 blocks away, cutting the headlights. He sat there in the darkened car, hands gripping the steering wheel as his chest heaved with the weight of realization. His phone buzzed on the console, a text from Rachel. "Miss you already. Hope your poker night's fun. Don't wait up." The message felt like acid against his skin. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a certainty. For weeks, Rachel's behavior had been off. Longer hours at work, a sudden interest in late-night gym sessions, and the carefully curated perfume she started wearing, one she had claimed was just a gift from Susan. Eric had initially dismissed it, chalking it up to a midlife need for novelty. But tonight, the jagged pieces of her story came together with cruel clarity. Eric's breath steadied as he opened his glove compartment, pulling out the small black notebook where he had begun documenting inconsistencies. He scanned the entries, the unexplained absences, the mismatched stories, the charges on the joint credit card. Methodical as ever, he had tracked everything, not out of paranoia but self-preservation. Tonight, he would gather the final piece. Slipping a lightweight rain jacket over his athletic frame, Eric left the car and walked toward the building. His sneakers made barely a sound on the wet pavement. The doorman barely glanced up, accustomed to the stream of late-night visitors to these exclusive residences. Eric's years of patience and calculated planning served him well. He had already done his reconnaissance. A camera in the parking structure caught Rachel's license plate weeks ago, and a discreet private investigator confirmed her frequent visits to apartment 402. Inside, the building smelled of wealth. Clean, cold, with a faint hint of eucalyptus. Eric kept his head low, his cap pulled down to shield his face. He rode the elevator to the 4th floor, the enclosed space closing in around him like a drumbeat, counting down the seconds to an inevitable confrontation. Outside 402, he paused, straining to hear through the heavy wooden door. Laughter. Rachel's laughter. It was a sound he hadn't heard in months. It was light, flirtatious, tinged with intimacy. And then a man's voice joined hers, deep and confident. Eric didn't knock. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a dramatic reveal. He turned on his heel and headed for the stairwell, his pulse cold and steady. Confrontation could wait. This wasn't about indulging his rage. It was about crafting the perfect reckoning. In the car, he opened his laptop, linking to the private investigator's secured server. Surveillance footage and photographs populated the screen. Rachel's laughter now matched with images of clandestine embraces and shared meals. He sat back, his green eyes glinting with the resolve of a man who had been underestimated. They thought they had the upper hand, but Eric was a strategist. He didn't just react. He calculated. Tomorrow would bring the first crack in their carefully constructed world. But for tonight, Eric would wait. The game had only just begun. Eric sat in his home office, bathed in the dim glow of his computer screen. Outside, the rain had intensified, tapping against the windows like a restless intruder. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, then moved with deliberate precision, opening folders that housed the evidence he had painstakingly gathered over the past few weeks. The screen flickered with images, Rachel exiting her car in the parking garage of the apartment complex, her arm brushing against the man identified as Ryan. They walked together like a couple accustomed to their rhythm, unaware that the rhythm was about to falter. Eric leaned back, rubbing his temples. His mind was a battlefield of emotions, each vying for dominance. Rage simmered just beneath the surface, but it was tempered by a cold determination. The next steps had to be flawless. Confronting Rachel head-on would satisfy an immediate thirst for justice, but it wouldn't drive the point home. No, she had to feel the consequences ripple through every part of her carefully constructed world. His phone vibrated, breaking his train of thought. It was Maggie, his sister. "My friend wants me to meet her at 7 tomorrow morning," she said quickly and handed him his cell. "Eric." Her voice was steady, a comforting anchor amidst the storm in his mind. "I know you're planning something, and I'm not going to ask you to stop. But don't let this destroy you." "It won't," he replied, his voice calm but laced with steel. "It's going to destroy them." "Oh," little sister grabbled. I don't mind if they are non-binary. Classes don't make a difference." There was a pause. Maggie knew her brother well enough to recognize the resolve in his tone. "Just be smart about it. No impulsive moves. I've been smart about it for weeks," he said, ending the call gently. Eric turned back to his desk, opening another file. This one was a meticulous spreadsheet of Rachel and Ryan's transactions. Dinners at high-end restaurants, boutique purchases that didn't fit their shared budget, and a weekend retreat at a luxury spa Rachel had claimed was a work bonding trip. He had cross-referenced dates and times against Rachel's calendar. The evidence was irrefutable, but his next move wasn't about proof. It was about impact. The following morning, Eric arrived at the office early, the first one in his department to settle into the building's silence. His position as a senior project manager at a top engineering firm gave him access to tools Rachel had clearly underestimated. While he handled multi-million-dollar contracts during the day, his personal skills in cybersecurity and forensic research became his weapon in this private war. He activated a program designed to scrub social media footprints, pulling archived posts, tagged images, and location check-ins Rachel had tried to bury. Each piece of the puzzle strengthened his plan. He wasn't going to expose her indiscretion in a single explosive moment. Instead, he would dismantle her world, piece by calculated piece. By lunchtime, Eric had contacted Rachel's workplace. With the help of an anonymous tip and carefully curated evidence, he ensured that the HR department received a damning file. Her company's strict policy on employee relationships guaranteed repercussions, especially given Ryan's seniority. But Eric wasn't done. He sent a second package to Ryan's wife. He had struggled with this decision, knowing it would devastate an innocent party. But Ryan's smugness in the photos, his casual hand at Rachel's back, his confident smile as they shared wine, stoked the fire of Eric's resolve. The truth would find its way to everyone who deserved to know it. That evening, Eric returned home to find Rachel already preparing dinner. She turned, greeting him with her warmest smile, as if nothing had changed. The dinner was pleasant, a cool distraction from his phantom worries about what might have happened to Mitch. A slight breeze came up as they entered. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, her voice cheerful. "Productive?" he replied, his expression neutral. As she turned back to the stove, Eric's mind churned with the knowledge of what was to come. Tomorrow, Rachel would wake to find her perfect facade shattered. Her job would be on the line, her reputation in tatters, and her lover scrambling to pick up the pieces of his own crumbling life. To address her problems, Eric wanted her to fly to stock, but Eric wasn't doing this just for revenge. He was reclaiming himself from the wreckage of her betrayal. He felt that there had been. He watched her stir the pot of soup, her auburn hair catching the light, and for a brief moment he felt a pang of sorrow. He had loved this woman, trusted her implicitly. But trust, once broken, could never be restored. Eric stood, walking to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside gleaming and raw. In its reflection, he saw his own image, resolute and unwavering. This wasn't just a reckoning for Rachel. It was a rebirth for him. And the morning arrived crisp and bright, but for Rachel it brought no inkling of the storm brewing on the horizon. She hummed softly as she dressed for work, unaware that her carefully balanced double life was about to collapse. In the kitchen, Eric sipped his coffee, watching her with a detached calm that belied the quiet chaos he had orchestrated overnight. She leaned over and kissed his cheek, her auburn hair brushing against his face. "Don't work too hard today," she said lightly, grabbing her tote and heading for the door. "You too," Eric replied, his voice measured. As the door clicked shut behind her, Eric let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The day's plan was already in motion, every detail meticulously crafted. By now, Rachel's email inbox would be flooded with notifications, some routine, some catastrophic. At her workplace, the first blow landed swiftly. A meeting notification popped up on her phone, an unscheduled conference with HR. Confused but unalarmed, Rachel adjusted her blazer and headed to the glass-walled office. She greeted the HR director with her usual charm, but the frosty reception immediately set her on edge. "Please, have a seat," the HR director said curtly. Rachel complied, her confident smile faltering. The director opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. "These were sent to us anonymously," she began, her tone devoid of warmth. "Do you recognize these receipts and photographs?" Rachel's heart sank as she glanced at the materials. Images of her and Ryan at intimate dinners, receipts for extravagant purchases, and even a few blurry snapshots of them entering the luxury apartment complex. Her mind raced, trying to conjure a plausible explanation, but the evidence was undeniable. "Beliefs are misleading," Rachel stammered. I can explain. "I suggest you save your explanations for the company's ethics review board," the director interrupted. "As you know, relationships between employees, especially those involving management, are a direct violation of policy." She closed the folder sharply, her expression hardening. "You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation." Rachel sat frozen, her polished veneer cracking under the weight of humiliation. The director stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Someone from IT will escort you to clear out your desk." Staggering back to her cubicle, Rachel's thoughts spiraled. Who could have done this? Who even knew? "The operator must have gotten loose," she said. Meanwhile, across town, Ryan was having his own reckoning. His wife, Melissa, a sharp and resourceful woman, had received an unexpected package that morning, a thick envelope containing a dossier of damning evidence. Inside were photos, text transcripts, and a detailed timeline of his affair with Rachel. Melissa sat in her kitchen, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. Each revelation was a dagger, confirming the suspicions she had buried for months. Ryan had always dismissed her concerns, brushing off her questions with easy charm. But now, the truth stared back at her, undeniable and cruel. When Ryan arrived home that evening, the confrontation was immediate. Melissa stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, the dossier clutched tightly in her hand. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice breaking. Ryan's face paled as he recognized the contents. He stammered an apology, but Melissa cut him off. "Brett, don't you dare insult me with excuses," she snapped. "You've betrayed me, our family, everything we built together. I want you out, tonight." Back in their suburban home, Eric received a text from Maggie. "Melissa just threw Ryan out. The dominoes are falling. You okay?" Eric stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "I'm fine. This is just the beginning." That evening, Rachel walked through the door, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and apprehension. She dropped her bag on the counter, hesitating when she noticed Eric sitting calmly in the living room, a thick folder in his lap. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice betraying none of the emotion simmering beneath the surface. She sighed, collapsing onto the couch across from him. "You have no idea. Work was a disaster." Eric tilted his head, feigning interest. "Really? What happened?" Rachel hesitated, her eyes flicking to the folder in his hands. "Nothing I can't handle," she said quickly. "Just office politics." Eric's lips curved into a faint smile as he opened the folder. "You mean this kind of office politics?" He slid the documents across the coffee table, the same evidence that had ended her career mere hours ago. Excerpt. Rachel's face drained of color as she flipped through the pages. Her hands trembled, and she looked up at Eric, her voice barely above a whisper. Where did you get this?" "I'm the one who sent it," Eric said, his tone cold and deliberate. "I know everything, Rachel. The lies, the affair, the money you wasted on him. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Tears welled in her eyes, but Eric held up a hand to silence her. "Don't you dare cry," he said, his voice sharp. "You don't get to play the victim here. You chose this, Rachel. You destroyed us." For the first time, Rachel was speechless. She sat there, staring at the man she had so thoroughly underestimated. As the magnitude of her choices came crashing down, Eric rose, towering over her. "Pack your things," he said evenly. "You can stay at his place. After all, isn't he worth everything you've thrown away?" As he walked away, Rachel called after him, her voice desperate. "Eric, wait, please. We can fix this. I'll do anything." The silence in the house was suffocating. Rachel sat on the couch where Eric had left her, her tear-streaked face frozen in disbelief. The folder he'd handed her lay open on the coffee table, its damning contents spilling out like a confession she hadn't intended to make. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the counter, but she couldn't bring herself to answer it. She knew who it would be, Ryan, panicked and desperate after the fallout of the day. Eric had disappeared into the bedroom, the door closed as firmly as the emotional wall he had built between them. She stared at the closed door, wanting to knock, to beg him to hear her out. But what could she possibly say? An hour passed. Then, two. Rachel finally rose, her steps hesitant as she approached the bedroom. Her hand hovered over the doorknob before she mustered the courage to twist it open. Eric was sitting on the edge of the bed, a duffel bag at his feet. His posture was rigid, his gaze fixed on the floor. "You're leaving?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Eric looked up, his green eyes devoid of the warmth she had always taken for granted. "No, Rachel, you are. If fighting with myself is going to make you happy, say that now and let me know." Her breath hitched. "Eric, please. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" He stood abruptly, his voice rising. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is backing into a parking post. This, what you did, was a deliberate betrayal over weeks, months, maybe years." Rachel flinched at his tone. She reached out, but he stepped back, his expression cold. "I loved you, Rachel," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I trusted you. Do you have any idea what it feels like to find out the person you built your life with was lying to your face every single day?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. It just did. I got caught up in something, but it didn't mean I stopped loving you." Eric laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and cutting. "You expect me to believe that? You think love is what you were feeling while you snuck off to his apartment? While you lied to me with a straight face?" Rachel dropped to her knees, clutching his hand. "Eric, please, I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." He pulled his hand away, his jaw tightening. "Fix this? There's no fixing this, Rachel. You killed it. You killed us. That's the life you made out of us. the life we needed to live, and now we're paying for it. The words hit her like a physical blow. She crumpled, sobbing into her hands as Eric moved past her, picking up the duffel bag. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered. "I don't care." Eric replied, his voice icy. "Go to Ryan. Go anywhere. Just get out of my house." Rachel sat there, paralyzed by the weight of his rejection. The man she had thought she could manipulate back into her life was gone, replaced by someone cold, resolute, and unyielding. She barely registered the sound of his footsteps retreating down the hall. Alone, Rachel eventually forced herself to her feet. She grabbed her phone, hesitating before opening Ryan's messages. He had sent her at least a dozen texts, each one more frantic than the last. "Melissa kicked me out. What are we going to do? Rachel, call me. We need to talk. I can't handle this without you."
She scrolled through them, her stomach twisting. For the first time, the weight of what she had done began to fully settle on her. Her world wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing entirely.
Ryan wasn't the answer. She had already seen the cracks in his confident facade when things started to unravel. His desperation disgusted her now, and she realized she had been chasing a fantasy, one that could never replace the life she had destroyed. The apartment felt cavernous as Rachel wandered aimlessly, her mind replaying Eric's words. She glanced at the photos on the walls, a smiling couple at a vineyard, a beach vacation, their wedding day. Each frame was a relic of a life she had shattered with her own hands. What about the other half, she wondered.
Hours later, she finally mustered the strength to pack a small bag. She wasn't sure where she would go, but she couldn't stay here. As she zipped up the suitcase, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her best friend, Susan.
"Rachel, what the hell is going on? Eric called me earlier. He didn't tell me much, but he sounded furious. Are you okay?" Rachel stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Susan had always been her sounding board, the person she could rely on to offer sympathy or advice. But now, Rachel felt an overwhelming shame. How could she admit the full extent of her betrayal to someone who had always admired her seemingly perfect marriage? "Well,"
her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she finally typed back, "It's over, Susan. Everything is over." She hit send and stared at the screen until the words blurred. It wasn't just her marriage that had ended. It was the life she had known, the identity she had crafted. For years, she had been the polished, perfect wife with the loving husband and the beautiful home. Now, she was a pariah, a cautionary tale.
As she stepped out into the cool night air, her suitcase trailing behind her, Rachel realized the magnitude of what she had lost. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing her out of the life she had taken for granted. 2 hours later, she found herself still in the same place. Eric's shadow lingered in the window, watching her leave. He didn't feel triumph or satisfaction, only a deep, aching void where his trust had once been. But even as he stood there, he knew this was the first step toward reclaiming himself. The reckoning was complete, and now it was time to rebuild. The house was quiet once Rachel left. Eric stood at the window for a long time, watching her silhouette fade into the darkness. The suitcase she dragged behind her thumped rhythmically on the pavement, each sound punctuating the silence that had overtaken the home.
This house had once been their sanctuary. Every corner held memories of their life together, laughter echoing in the kitchen as they prepared meals, quiet mornings, sipping coffee on the patio, and lazy Sundays spent binge-watching old TV shows. Now, it felt like an empty shell, stripped of warmth and familiarity.
Eric turned away, the stillness pressing on him like a physical weight. He walked through the house, the echoes of his footsteps unnerving in their finality. In the living room, the coffee table still bore the folder of evidence he had used to confront Rachel. He stared at it for a moment before picking it up and tucking it into his desk drawer. It had served its purpose. The next morning, Eric woke early, the sun filtering through the blinds. He hadn't slept much, but his mind felt sharper than it had in weeks. He made his way to the kitchen, brewing coffee as he opened his laptop. His inbox was already full, including a message from his divorce lawyer confirming the initial paperwork had been filed. As the coffee maker gurgled, Eric felt a mix of emotions. Relief that the process had begun, anger at the betrayal that necessitated it, and a faint pang of sadness for what was being lost. But as he took a sip of his coffee, he resolved not to dwell on what could no longer be. He spent the morning making plans. First, he drafted a letter to Rachel's employer, formally declining to interfere in any legal proceedings related to her workplace misconduct. It was a gesture of closure, not forgiveness, but a decision to separate his life from hers completely. Next, he called his sister Maggie. She had been his rock through the discovery of Rachel's affair, offering both practical advice and emotional support. "But how are you holding up?" she asked, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "Better than I thought I would," Eric admitted. "It's strange, though. I keep expecting her to walk back in, like it's all a bad dream." "It's not," Maggie said gently. "But you're stronger than this, Eric. You've already taken the hardest steps. The rest will come." Their conversation shifted to lighter topics, and by the time they hung up, Eric felt a flicker of normalcy returning. The afternoon brought another call, this one from Melissa, Ryan's soon-to-be ex-wife. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her voice firm but tinged with emotion, "for exposing the truth. It's been hard, but at least I can move forward now." "I didn't do it for thanks," Eric replied. "But I'm glad you're finding your way through this." She hesitated. "It's strange, isn't it? How the people we trust most can turn out to be strangers." Eric nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Yeah, but it also shows you who you can really count on." After the call, Eric went for a long run, something he hadn't done in weeks. The familiar rhythm of his feet hitting the pavement and the cool breeze against his face helped clear his mind. Each step felt like a small release, a way of shedding the weight of the past few months. When he returned home, sweat dripping from his brow, he showered and stood for a long moment in front of the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at him looked tired but resolute. In the evening, Eric sat on the back patio, a glass of bourbon in hand. The sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. He thought about the future, not in terms of revenge or what Rachel had done, but what he could build for himself. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a catalyst. It forced him to confront what he wanted from his life, to reevaluate the things he had been willing to overlook for the sake of peace. As the stars began to dot the night sky, Eric felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. Inside, his phone buzzed with another message from Rachel. He didn't open it. Instead, he powered off the device and leaned back in his chair, letting the cool night air wash over him. The reckoning had come and gone, leaving destruction in its wake. But from the ashes, Eric saw the faint outline of a new beginning, a life where trust, respect, and self-worth weren't negotiable. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a small smile. The past was behind him, and while the path ahead wasn't clear, it was his to forge. And that, he realized, was all he needed. In the great hall, he thought for the 1000th time. But Eric didn't look back. The door to their bedroom clicked shut, leaving Rachel to face the ruins of her own making. That night,